Hey everyone, it's Chrono. Today I'll be reviewing the HiFiMan Ananda. Before I start this video, I would like to thank Headphones.com for sending this pair of HiFiMan Anandas out for review. In case you're not aware, Headphones.com is an online retailer with a 365-day return policy, as well as the home for the headphone community forums. I highly suggest you check them out. I'll be leaving the link to their store and the forums down in the description below. Now, the Ananda is a headphone I've been very curious about since trying out the Sundara because those headphones impressed me with the level of performance they achieved at $349. So, for this review, I want to not only cover the Ananda's performance, but also gauge how much of an upgrade it is over the Sundara, and hopefully answer some questions about how these compare to the LCD2, since at some point they were both in the same $1,000 price point. Alright, let's start the review, and just remember that there will be timestamps in the description for you to skip around to if you're interested in any specific part of the review. Starting off as per usual with power requirements, I'll say that the Ananda are actually very efficient. They come in at an impedance of 25 ohms and a sensitivity level of 103 dB. I still think an amp is required so you have some volume headroom, but it doesn't need to be the most powerful amp out there. I think that something like a JDS Labs Atom or a Liquid Spark will do just fine here. Moving on and getting over to build quality and comfort, I think it's pretty good on the Ananda. They use the same headband design as the Sundara, which is made mostly out of metal with the exception of the plastic housing for the extension mechanism. The ear cups themselves are made entirely out of plastic, and while they feel very sturdy, they don't feel particularly premium. The only concern here is HiFiMan's poor longevity track record. Aside from that, it feels very well put together and made with durable materials. Comfort here is awesome as well. For a planar this large, the Ananda is very light at only 400 grams, and the headband does a very good job at evenly distributing that weight. The ear cups look shallow at first, but they are actually quite deep, so my ears never touch the driver or anything like that, and I have fairly large ears. It should come as no surprise given the size of the ear cups as well that these provide a lot of room for your ears to fit in, and I never feel like I'm touching the inner sides of the pads. My only complaint here is that the headband doesn't actually have any swivel for the ear cups, and I think this might prevent some users from getting a good fit, and it might create some strange pressure points. However, I didn't have any problem due to the lack of swivel, so I can wear these pretty much indefinitely. I think that the comfort here is, very good, but do be aware that they don't have any swivel for you to adjust the ear cups. Okay, so moving on to sound, I want to actually start off by saying that the Ananda out of the box is one of the most pleasant and enjoyable headphones I've listened to. Now, of course that doesn't mean that the Ananda is flawless or that it has a perfect frequency response. All I'm saying is that to me it came across as very easy listening. And actually, while the Ananda does have a very good tonal balance and frequency response, I think that it has a couple more deviations here and there than even the Sundara did. So for this sound section, I'll be focusing, of course, on the Ananda's performance, but also on how it compares to the Sundara and to the LCD2. In this sound section, I won't be talking too much about EQ, but it's because I don't think that the Ananda really needs it, nor does it benefit that much from it. So starting off with bass, I think the Ananda's bass is very good, and overall it's an upgrade over that of the Sundara. Now the Sundara already has a very good and linear extension all the way down to 20 Hz, especially after the latest revision, and that is also present in the Ananda, but I feel like the Ananda is slightly faster and more detailed in the bass, and also the actual level of the bass is like just at the right level where I don't feel like I need to add any sort of bass shelf through EQ. The only thing that I modify through EQ on the Ananda's bass is that to my ears there's a bit of a 200 Hertz bump, which in bass heavy tracks, it makes the bass come across as a little too forward for me, and it makes the Ananda lose a little bit of that definition. Now, for dynamics in the bass, I actually think that that is a category where the Sundara outperforms the Ananda. The Sundara has a lot better of a punch and slam quality when compared to the Ananda. And actually, I have to say that compared to all the other headphones that I've tried or ever listened to, the Ananda is probably one with the weakest dynamics. This isn't to say that you don't feel the bass in the Ananda, you definitely do, it's actually quite present. It's just that it doesn't have that immediate sort of impact that you get with other headphones like the DT1990 Pro or the Focal LX. Now, compared to the LCD2, I mean, the bass on the LCD2 is much better than that of the Ananda. It is a lot more profound, better textured, a little bit faster, and it also has significantly more slam. Nonetheless, I still find the Ananda's bass to be very good. It has all the extension you need and it has great level of detail. Alright, so now moving on to the mids. I actually find the Ananda's mids to be, for the most part, very tonally accurate, and they never really sound artificial. They have a very good timbre. However, this is the section of the frequency response where the Ananda deviates the most from target. It's not by a lot, but it does have a couple issues here and there. The first thing is that there is a small elevation at around 700 Hz, and although it's very hard to notice, it does make the lower midtones come across as a little boxed in. This is followed by a fairly significant dip at 1.5K that, not unlike the Sundara's 2K dip, thins out the body of the mids quite a bit. Lastly, there is a peak at 3K that can occasionally make the upper mid range come across as a little forward and maybe a little shouty. Now, these issues are very minor, but when put together, they do make the Ananda's overall mid-range tonality a little bit less accurate than that on the Sundara's. I also have to mention that the jump in resolution when going from the Sundara to the Ananda for the mid-range was not nearly as noticeable or as big as I expected, which is a little disappointing. Now, comparing it to the LCD2, I actually find this to be very interesting because my conclusion on it changes completely whether or not EQ is to use. Without EQ, the Ananda undoubtedly outperforms the LCD2 in mid-range. I mean, for just about every category, timbre, tonality, resolution, they're just better on the Ananda. However, once I applied EQ, I actually found the opposite to be true. I found the timbre, tonality, and resolution to be more accurate and more correct sounding to me on the LCD2. However, there's the caveat that you need to use custom EQ to get the LCD2 to sound better than the Ananda, as even when I use Reveal Plus, I didn't find the LCD2 to sound as natural as the Ananda. But yeah, that's about all there is I have to say for the mid-range. Now, for the last part of the frequency response, let's talk about the highs, which I actually really enjoy on the Ananda. Now, when I reviewed the Sundara, I said that they had amazingly tuned highs. They just sounded very tonally correct, and somehow I feel like they've been further refined in the Ananda. They sound even more natural to me than they did on the Sundara, and actually I have to mention that the jump in resolution here in the highs when going from the Sundara to the Ananda is more drastic than the jump in resolution in the mid-range. I think that this is the section of the frequency response that gets the biggest upgrade. I sincerely don't have any complaints about the Ananda's highs. The only thing is that, from my preference, I feel like the air above 10K is still a little muted, as was the case with the Sundara. Now, comparing the LCD2's highs to that of the Ananda's, I think the LCD2 has better extension and resolution in the highs. However, they don't come across as pleasant or as easygoing as on the Ananda. But anyways, let's move on from frequency response and let's go into soundstage and imaging, which is amazing on these. Without a doubt, the Ananda has the widest soundstage out of all the headphones that I've listened to, and it never feels like it's being artificially widened. I think it actually gives music a very natural and engaging atmosphere. So yeah, the soundstage here is wider than on the DT1990 Pro, wider than on the LCD2, and definitely much wider than on the Sundara, LX, and HD660S. I mean, the Ananda just has a really fantastic soundstage. Imaging is actually another area where the Ananda gets a very noticeable upgrade over the Sundara. The Sundara had a bit of a weak center image, so in video games and in certain songs it would be a little bit disorienting, but that's not a problem in the Ananda. I still have to say that I think the LCD2's imaging is a little more precise, but not by a lot. Okay, so I know that I've been praising the Ananda's soundstage and imaging quite a bit, but I still have to mention that the instrument separation here is phenomenal. I mean, I listen to a lot of music that has a lot of, vocals and instruments mixed into one single track, but the layering and instrument separation on the Ananda does such an amazing job at distinguishing all the elements that make up each track. Okay, so now to talk about something that isn't as impressive, and that's the dynamics. I mentioned this when talking about the bass set. The Ananda doesn't really do much in the way of punch and slam, and even the microdynamics, I don't feel like instruments carry as much weight in the Ananda as they do in other headphones. They don't have a lot of that immediate attack or punch. As I mentioned earlier, this is something that the Sundara does better. It's something that the LCD2 does much better. The DT1990 Pro also does it better. The Focal LX as well. So yeah, dynamics is one of the Ananda's weaknesses. Lastly, for sound, I want to mention that I did make an EQ profile for the Ananda. I'll leave it in the description down below. It doesn't really make any significant changes. It just slightly compensates for those very small peaks and dips here and there that the Ananda has, especially in the mid-range. So if you want to try it out, description down below, and you can input it into your EQ software of choice. Okay, so to wrap up the video, there's two conclusions that I got from testing the Ananda. The first one is, if you already own a Sundara, I don't really think it's worth upgrading from the Sundara to the Ananda because they're very sonically similar. I mean, yes, the Ananda has a much bigger soundstage, but aside from that, they're very close. And the other thing is that now that the Ananda has gone down in price from $999 to $699, I really think that anybody who was looking for a headphone above $500 should really consider the HiFiMan Ananda. Right out of the box, they're a very good performer in just about every category, and I just don't think that they'll disappoint. Now, for those wondering, LCD2 or Ananda, me personally, I still prefer the LCD2, but that's just because that for the music I listen to, I find its tonality and especially the way it presents the mids, I think that they're more accurate. They're a lot richer sounding on the LCD2, but that's only after custom EQ, and it's not even by a wide margin. So yeah, for me, I think if you EQ, I recommend the LCD2. If you're not gonna bother with EQ or anything, I think the Ananda is a better choice, especially now that it's $300 less expensive than the LCD2. That being said, that price drop for the Ananda does make me wonder how it compares to things like the Aeon 2 Open as well as the LCD2 Classic, which is closer to that price range. Hopefully I'll get to look at that sometime in the future. But yeah, anyways, that's all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it helpful. If you did, do consider dropping a like or even subscribing to the channel for future content. Until next time, this is Chrono signing off.